you're proving our point here. All this hedge fund here, BlackRock here, Crystal Rock over there, that's all of you guys who made this. We do no. We have ETH, Bitcoin, we don't do BlackRock. So you guys ruined the economy by making these hedge funds so high. Oh, I want to spend this much on a house. You guys inflated the economy over your lifetimes.
That's facts.
Well,
We just got here.
There are plenty of millennials and Gen Zers who are now in this upper echelon of finance. So I don't think it's a boomer, it's a greed thing, because we're not going back. My parents paid $40,000 for their house in 1960 outside of Boston. It's now $2.8 million.
What? Sounds like they came. They came up.
You
just hit a max rent.
You
guys got the method.
My friend's parents paid $5,000 for their summer home. In 1946, it's now worth close to $8 million.
Yeah!
You're proving our point. Y'all ruined the economy.
Y'all ruined our economy.
Can we buy homes? You guys,
Let me get this straight. If I want that house, I gotta pay $8.5 million. You just came
Okay,
up.
thank you very much.
Hello. Hi. You know, I started on cleanup just like you guys. But now, see, I'm washing lettuce. Soon I'll be on fries, then the grill. A year or two, I make assistant manager. And that's where the big bucks start rolling in.
Just 2 years, eh?
What's happening, fam? L.A.R. or sick L.A.R. movement still moving. So this is the boomer wealth gap, right? Generation boomer wealth gap. I don't know how to call it, but there's some things that, and I was one of the people early talking about this. When I say early, years before people started talking about it. So here's the thing. When they got to the point where he said, look, my parents bought the house for $40,000. Now it's worth $2.8 million. My friends' parents bought their house for their summer home for $5,000, and now it's worth $8 million. That was in Jim Crow. Just for some of y'all to get this, so some of the wealth that boomers inherited came from Jim Crow. And I'm going somewhere with this. So, and what wound up happening was, because I have the story of, some of the black folks in my family, some of the folks in my family, like they're not black, I'm tripping. The folks in my family, land got stolen in Jim Crow. Well, take that back. After Jim Crow, because my great grandmother was living in the projects in the 80s in New Orleans, because they tried to kill her because my great grandfather died and he had land, cattle, oil on the property and an oil rig. So when they tried to get him, but they couldn't. But when he died, they basically tried to kill her, and she went to the projects early. She went to the projects because white people wasn't gonna follow her in the projects because it was full of black people. So, and that's my great grandmother. And the people who stolen that and who walk around like, oh, this is our land, they white people, so they got away with it. So that's part of the generational wealth gap is Jim Crow. Same thing with, you talk to the black folks who had homes, they couldn't buy homes, so they had to buy homes through a third party, and had that happen in my family. But that was a rampant thing in Chicago too. That's why Martin Luther King was in Chicago, because you would, that's partially where the slumlord thing comes, where you have black folks who are buying these third party type homes, townhomes and whatnot, and the white folks, whether they be white or Jewish, the white folks, because the economy was set like that, because you couldn't borrow from a bank, right? The white folks they would overcharge the black folks and basically pay off two houses, the house that the black folks were trying to buy and the house that they already owned. It was paying off two houses, part of the whole Levittown suburban thing, right? So that's why you see black folks in urban areas, right? And because they created the suburbs during Jim Crow. And a lot of the time, the black folks they paid off the house but never got the house because they came with some janky little, oh, yo, you missed by 30 seconds today, so the whole deal is off type of scenario. So now these families had multiple homes on that hustle, right? So over time, people had accumulated a lot of real estate, a lot of wealth because of that. The other thing, criminality, business, i.e., a lot of insurance scams. You know, Jim Crow to the 80s, maybe I would say early 90s, but not so much. People used to just, businesses are burned down. That's what Hell Week in Detroit and, it was burning down the Chicago, it was a disco destruction, whatever that was. But is that Hell Week in Detroit? Y'all know what I'm talking about. People from Detroit know what I'm talking about. Devil's Week or something like that. They burned down a bunch of businesses, but a lot of times people was burning down their own businesses and claiming that, black folks did it. And then they would get the payout, and then, either rebuild and then build another business. It was that type of stuff. Insurance scams. Because people weren't, insurance companies couldn't, that was part of racism. That's how people knew how to get over with racism. Like you could blame the blacks, and well, it's true. See, over the years, insurance companies they got hip to that. Whether it be robberies, but at the same token, if y'all remember recently, they had the thing where I don't know if there was like Arab or Asian, but they had the store owners in like Shreveport, and they kept saying that they were getting robbed by fictitious black people because they were trying to get their visa. So it went from insurance to now, citizenship. So the scam changes, but it's the same scam. Find somebody black, blame somebody black, everything will get overlooked. So now that's a whole nother thing. Education. Like I finished college during the beginning of, no, I can't even say that. I finished college, the doubling and tripling and quadrupling of college costs. I was in that era because I found a way to make it cheaper. But like I tell a story about my freshman year. They were somebody went to Tulane. If y'all know, Tulane is like Northwestern in Illinois, or like Miami used to be. Like Miami was more of an Ivy League school, like Rice or those type of schools, like Penn. You know what I'm saying? Stuff like that. So Tulane is like the Louisiana version of that. Guy, he graduated top of the class, and he was like, I don't know what to do because I owe $250,000 in student loans. And that was a speech we got as freshmen. But I was at an HBCU, and I knew people who had that issue. As the years went on. So quote unquote, boomers didn't have that issue. School wasn't that expensive, but life wasn't as expensive. So you gotta take into consideration what it is with inflation back then and now. Because interest rates, I remember in the 80s, interest rates was crazy. Like the interest rates are now when people get credit cards and they're 34%. That was like the interest rates in the 80s. That's what that was. Oh, let me rewind. Because I do know some black folks who bought real estate and they became multimillionaires off of property during Jim Crow. Interestingly enough, they had to be in California. in the Bay because the South wasn't happening. There's numerous stories about people who own, even in California, people own beach land, the eminent domain, let me scam you, that happened. But the South is rampant with that. The Midwest is rampant with that. East Coast, yeah. So when these young men and women are like, yo, man, y'all ruin the economy, they inherited a lot from their parents. See, on one end, is it greed? Yes, because I remember the savings and loan scandal. Y'all remember the when the housing bubble burst, when they had the what type of loans was it? Subprime mortgages. Prior to the pandemic, when that happened, because people have been getting over on the system. Backtrack a little bit. 80s, and maybe it stopped in the 90s. Part of the wealth gap came from bankruptcy. That was the thing that used to happen. Because I know it was rampant in the 80s where people you can file bankruptcy like back like in the 80s and maybe the early 90s, but I just think it stopped in the late 80s. People could buy a home they couldn't afford, buy cars they couldn't afford, and then file bankruptcy. And when they file bankruptcy, they get to keep the house and the cars. People was doing that a lot. Like, even they used to get on current President Trump because of all his bankruptcies back in the day. And the reason people file bankruptcy is because, hey, I can keep everything. Everything. I just got a free pass. So they changed a lot. That's why it's like Chapter 7, Chapter 11, Chapter 13. Like now there's different type of bankruptcies you have to file. You just can't just say I ain't got it, and then and show you ain't got it. Even if you got it, you hid it somewhere, right? Because that was part of the business criminality. So when the older man talks about greed, he's talking about inheriting property that's inflated, and not to mention, here's where some of this gets tricky. Because the older some people get, the higher their healthcare cost goes up. So people can have inherited wealth or accumulated wealth, and what eats at that is actually your healthcare. So yeah, he might be 60, 70 years old and be sitting on, millions technically, but every month they getting at it, chipping away thousand, that type of situation. And that's why you had all these old folks with the reverse mortgages and people was losing property like that because it was another hustle. Like the old guy was talking about greed, And then when you talk about the financial world, I know some of y'all don't know this, but when you get in the financial world, sometimes the older people, they've been in it for years. They've made big deals over the years that got them where they're at. But at the same time, they work the younger people coming into finance to death. They doing all the heavy lifting, and the old guys just walking around, sitting courtside and in suites and whatnot, you know, like living off of what they did, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And a lot of that, when you say hedge funds, venture capitalism, um, what else? What else were they doing? Uh, betting against the market. You know what I'm saying? Like oh man, just destroying it because it makes a small amount of group mega rich, but everybody else has to eat the cost. Everybody else has to eat the cost. That's why you know AIG went under, Enron went under, Lehman Brothers. That's why they had to save the auto industry and the insurance industry. The too big to fail type stuff is because people were just cooking the books because there was so much money that was already made and already inherited that they just decided you know, we don't have to know business anymore. We're just blowing it. That's when you see all of these people, businesses done at the golf course. But the business has been going downhill. You get what I'm saying? They taking lunches at strip clubs. They buying cocaine on a company black card. You know, you've seen that all the way up to the NFL. Y'all remember when them coaches got fired because they was doing coke with the strippers on live, you know, and they recorded it. Like, this is a normal thing. So the wealth gap comes from a lot of inherited wealth from the silent generation and the greatest generation, because they wasn't living it up. But you say boomers kind of benefited off of Jim Crow, and I'm talking about white people specifically. They benefited off of the income of Jim Crow after it ended, because a lot of the policies of Jim Crow, civil rights was in 64, 65. Some of the policies actually didn't get enforced to the 1980s, like the fair housing. So in that whole time span, people believe that it's good business, and people it was inheriting a lot of money from the past and doing a whole lot of bad business and rolling the dice. That's what it was rolling dice. Because most of the people that you think about who are billionaires and mega millionaires now, they got their money from the tech boom. Think about that. A lot of older Gen Z and the youngest boomers, they got a lot of their money from the tech boom, or like Nike, or you know what I'm saying, Google, Starbucks, Amazon. It's all of that type of stuff. Because when you think about the the Walton family, their dad set up the business. They're the 6 kids who inherited. So what was he? Silent generation, greatest generation. They inherited that. You know what I'm saying? It's exceedingly grown, kind of like Vince McMahon in the WWE. He inherited the wrestling and took it from his dad and took it to another level. That's what that is. Same like with the President Trump. He inherited a construction business from his dad and did something with it. Same thing with Jeff Bezos. His dad was a attorney, and he had enough money to give him a startup for a startup. I think that was the same thing with Bill Gates, if I'm not mistaken. But a lot of that, came from the Jim Crow era, or on the remnants of it. And that's why, you see all of this pseudo racism now, because people want to go back to Jim Crow because it was money in it for folks. But that's just my 2 cents. You tell me what you think. Like, share, subscribe. Catch you on the next one. Peace.